Hello and welcome to another tutorial. Today we are going to be taking a look at how to set up a boilerplate with utility classes for Oxygen website. What is a boilerplate? If you have a couple of website projects that you work on a regular basis, you find out that it is painstaking to repeatedly set up, your WordPress installation each time you want to do a website. So that means you have to, install your plugins, do all your setup, everything that you always do. You do the same thing each time, so it is not really a good practice. There was a time I used to do it like that. Anytime I want to build a website, I would just start with a fresh WordPress installation, and then I'll start installing all the plugins that I need to do, and then open up Oxygen to set up everything I want to set up. And I do that process each time I want to build a website, until I got to find out that wait a minute, this isn't productive at all. It's waste a lot of time, and it just makes you do repetitive tasks unnecessarily. So the best solution for that is to set up a boilerplate, what you would call like a template. A boilerplate is kind of like a standardized setup or method or a procedure that may be used over and over again without making major changes to the original setup. So you use a boilerplate to increase efficiency, to increase the standardization in the structure and design of your website. So let's just start. So what I normally do is, what you typically want to do is, maybe you have a WordPress installation. It could be local, it could be online, but the most important thing is for you to have a WordPress installation. Okay, so the first thing, the number one thing, we're going to go through like 7 or 8 steps to setting up this boilerplate. And so the first step is this: you install all your commonly used plugins. So that's the first thing you're going to do. So once you set up your WordPress installation, you put in your commonly used WordPress plugin. So here I have this installation, and I've installed the plugins that I know that I commonly use. Not all the plugins I use each time I build a website, but the ones that are common to all websites. For instance, some websites don't have WooCommerce, so I don't install the plugins that are related to WooCommerce. Okay, well, maybe except since I'm using the Oxygen sandbox, you have this element for WooCommerce, but typically since not every time it's not all the website that I build that has a WooCommerce feature, so I would typically not include that in my boilerplate. Alternatively, you could have 2 sets of boilerplates, one for general and then the other that is specifically for for WooCommerce. So you have a WooCommerce boilerplate, so you can install the WooCommerce and everything that comes with it, all your add-ons that has to do with WooCommerce. So here I have advanced custom field and custom fields pro, depending if you have the free version. If you don't have the pro, and then I have the custom field, all these plugins that I need, I use for my website. Hydrogen Pack is always one of them. Oxy Extra is a must. Well, I wouldn't say a must have, but these plugins are a must have for me. I have worked with Oxygen without them, and then I've come to find out that they make my work better, Swiss knife and all. So then this for me is a must, the Oxygen navigator that provides these shortcuts. Okay, so that's the first thing. Number one, install all commonly used plugins. And the second one is I make sure I install code snippets. So now I install this plugin called code snippet. Now if there's any code snippet that I would typically use in all my website, I just drop it there in the boilerplate, okay, so that it would always be there, anytime that I need, to, do a new website. That's the second thing. The third thing is to create common templates. So let's head over to template, okay, so under Oxygen template. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a new template. So in my boilerplate, I want certain templates to be already created, okay, not all. Like I said, if you have a WooCommerce boilerplate, you could create template for WooCommerce pages, but for the general boilerplate, I'm not going to create WooCommerce. I'm just going to create the main template, and that will be catch all. So I'm just going to publish that. And then the second template that I will add is the 404 template. So those are the two, you know, templates that I would put on my boilerplate. Okay, the main template and the 404 template, and that's because every website would need a main template and every website would need a 404 template. And then you could go ahead to create other templates for, you know, the blog posts and the blog archive. You have a lot of templates you can create. You have single blog posts, pages, inner content, and all. So there are a lot of, you know, other templates you can create. For instance, not every website has a blog page, you know, or a blog, you know, feature. Not every website has a search feature. So I'm just going to leave it at these two. Okay, and then I'm going to go ahead and set up my main template with the header and the footer. That's the next step. All right, so I'm going to go to Oxygen template, and then I'm going to click to edit my main template. So I'm going to go edit with Oxygen. Then the fifth one will be, we'll look at configuration of the global settings in Oxygen. Okay, and then the sixth one will be creating utility classes for the boilerplates that we will always reuse. And the seventh one will be exporting our boilerplate so that we can always import it into another WordPress installation. All right, so we are here at the main template. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to drop a header builder. Now, if you don't want to use a header builder, you can drop a device section depending on what you use to build your website. And then I'm going to drop the inner content. It is very important to have an inner content, and so that you can always, you know, inherit this this main template. And then I'm going to drop the footer, which of course I want to make it a section. And then just for the purpose of visual representation, I want to add maybe just a color to different for the color on the header and also for the footer. Okay, all right, now so I have my inner content, I have the header and the footer. Okay, now the next thing I'm going to do is to give my footer a class. This is what I would like to be in all my, sorry, I made a mistake there. I'm not supposed to put that dot. Now I'm going to give it a class of footer. This is what I want to be in all my installation, so I can set up my footer to stay at the bottom. And then I'm going to go ahead and create a style sheet. So I'm going to add a style sheet. I'm going to call it global. And then in that style sheet, let me change this themes. In that style sheet, I'm going to set up my template in such a way that my footer would stay at the bottom, irrespective of the you know, the content, you know, how much content I have in my on my website. So I'm just gonna just quickly write this code: HTML, okay, height 100%, okay, and I'm gonna write another one: body display flex. All right, body display flex. We're gonna write the flex direction. I'm gonna make it 100%. All right, so that sets up, you know, the body CSS for the body, and then I'm just gonna put my footer margin top auto. So that is the CSS I want in my global style sheet. This is the standard CSS I use for all my websites to make sure that I drop that footer at the bottom. So I'm just going to go to the front page and take a look at it if it is okay. So you can see that my footer, you know, is right here at the bottom. you know, and then without any unnecessary scroll bars. So now that is it. So I've set up the header and the footer. Of course, the reason you can't see the header is because there's really nothing inside, and that's fine. I don't need anything to be inside, but of course in my template, when I come into the main template, I will see that I have a footer. Now the second thing I'm going to do is to configure the global settings. So I'm going to go to Manage Settings, Global Styles. The first thing is to set up the global colors. Okay, so in setting up your global colors, you have to realize that you're going to be using this boilerplate for different websites. So, and the different websites will have different colors. Okay, so for instance, a particular company's color would be red and maybe orange, okay, maybe and yellow. So in naming your colors, you really want to be careful how you name it. You don't want to, because in Oxygen, once you name a color, you cannot change the name of that color. So you want your naming convention to, you know, to be generic. Okay, so you could use like a primary color. Okay, and then in this primary color, I'm going to choose maybe something like this, red. Okay, and then I'm going to add it. Okay, click add color to add. So you have the primary color. Okay, and then I'm going to go secondary color. Okay, so that will be the secondary. Okay, and then I'm going to go orange on that. Okay, I'm going to click add color, and then I'm going to add a third color. I'm going to call it accent color. Okay, and that will be maybe my accent color. So depending on, now this will depend on the company you're working for, the website that you're working on. They'll provide you with the colors that they have. So let's just say I want my accent color to be something like a very light cream color. Okay, something like that, and then I'm gonna add that, and then you have your, you know, maybe you have your light color themes. Maybe you could call it, you know, accent light, depending on what you want to call it. You know, just the naming convention has to be just generic. Okay, and since you can delete colors, you find out that, you know, if you have an installation that you don't require as much color scheme, okay, that means you would not need that color scheme and you would simply delete it. But for the ones that you already have, you know, you just need to go in and change the color, since you already have that labeled out as primary, secondary, and accent. Okay, so that does it for the accent color. So I'm just gonna save what we have so far. The second global setting we're gonna deal with will be the fonts. So you're gonna select, you know, maybe the default fonts that you want for all your installation. Personally, I always use Poppins for my default font. Okay, and then for my body, I'll go for Roboto. So those are my default installation. Okay, and then you can choose the weight that you want available for your the ones you want to be loaded. Okay, so you want to load maybe just a few font weights, so you could choose some of them. So I go with 700, 500, and 300. So you could do that with, you know, any of these. So I would just leave them. That is left for you to decide. Okay, and then the next one is what you really would want to spend a little bit of time setting up, is your headings. Okay, so I'm just going to quickly save this now. Once we start setting up the headings and you know, setting up some other utility classes, we want to be working within a page. Okay, so I'm going to quickly go back to the admin. Okay, and then I'm going to go to pages, and then I'm going to use the sample page. Okay, so let me edit that, and all right. So now by default it uses the main template. Of course, we have some content here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to edit it with Oxygen so we can continue our setup. Okay, so right now what I want to do is I'm just going to add heading. Okay, so before doing that, I probably would like to just set up some things. Okay, so I'm going to add a section. Okay, and then I'm going to drag that heading inside that section. All right, and then I'm going to duplicate that maybe like 4 times. So I don't want to waste time with, you know, all the headings, so I'm just going to go from H1 to H4. So I'll choose H2, H3, H4. Okay, so we have this heading, so I'm going to open that setting, global styles heading. So we have our headings here in pixels. So what you want to do is, so you want to set up your heading to be a bit responsive. Okay, so you want to set up your default heading so that if you have your, you know, small screen size, your headings will adapt. So the first thing you there are different ways you can do this. You know, you can use different kind of adaptive and dynamic size CSS. You have the clamp, you have the VH unit, you have the Vmax and all. So we're going to use Vmax. So for H1, I'm going to go to none, and then I'm going to start with 5 Vmax. Okay, that is too much. Okay, so 3 Vmax. So you just want to look at what looks good at this screen size, and then you know that once you bring it down, it's going to adjust. Okay, and becomes small. So okay, so that seems fine. So very much okay with the font sizes. Okay, now if I wanted to a bit bigger, I could just go with maybe 3.5. okay, and then you can see that it scales down appropriately. Another thing I usually like setting up on my header is the line height. Okay, so you can see, so I go to where that line will break into 2, so I can see how much of a space, you know, I have there. So my line height, I typically make it 1.2. okay, so that if I have it break like this, it'll have some decent spacing, not too much, not too small. Okay, now so you repeat the same process for the H2. okay, so for the H2 I'm going to do the same. I'm just going to copy this and then set it to none and paste it. And of course we're not making it 5 because the H2, so I'm going to make the H2, let's say 2.4. okay, now what I typically do is, if I want it to be the same size it was by default, I would just, you know, remove that. Okay, and you know, just see how it was before. Okay, like 30 pixel, and then I'll compare that to what I have. Okay, so, and then to see, you know, what the difference in size is, because sometimes I want it to be the same size on the desktop as the default, and then but I want it to go, you know, smaller as we go down the breakpoint. So that is 2.4 Vmax for the H2, and then of course you can set the line height, but I think the line height was quite okay here, so I don't have any issues with that. And then we do the same for the H3. okay, and then I'm going to set this to none, and then I'm going to make that from 2.4 I'm going to make it 2. okay, so that's 2. I'm okay with that 2, with the way it looks. Okay, and then for the H4 I'm gonna paste that also. Then in this case I'll make it maybe 1.6. okay, or 1.8. Alright, so everything is properly adjusted depending on the viewport height or viewport width you are viewing it. Okay, so that is it for the, you know, the heading. You could add more and make adjustment as you know, as you find necessary. The next thing I'm going to add will be a text. Okay, so let me just populate it with some text. All right, and when it comes to the text, I'm usually very okay with, you know, the sizes across the viewports. You know, I typically want my text to remain the same size, you know, on the large screen and on the small screen also. Okay, so if you want to make adjustment to that body text, okay, to be responsive, maybe you need it to be a little bit smaller on the smaller breakpoint, you could go back to body text. Okay, and then you could set the size. For this, I'll typically recommend that you use maybe clamp. Okay, clamp would probably work better, because if you use Vmax, let's make this big here. Let's say you use 1 Vmax. Okay, maybe that one was too much. 1.6, 1.2. Okay, say you have 1.2 and you're okay with the way that looks. So you can see that it becomes very small here. So I would really not recommend Vmax for this. Okay, so for this I would recommend using like 1 rem. Okay, and that 1 rem is just equals to, you know, the maybe typically 16 pixel, and then maybe for the small screen you want it to be maybe just a little bit smaller than 1 rem, maybe 0.8 for instance. If we go to the small screen now, if you want it to be like maybe 0.8, okay, just like that. So you could just go to the clamp calculator, all right, and set it from, you know, 0.8 to 1. Okay, that's from the smallest unit to the biggest unit, and then you can now copy that style that is generated. Okay, and then you'll come here and just paste it. All right, so it will dynamically change depending on the viewport width. And one thing I found is that if you want it to start exactly at, let's say 1, you might want to bump this up to maybe just slightly up, because it's going to be a little bit smaller. You know, the calculation is going to make it a little bit smaller, so you might just want to make that slightly higher than 1. Okay, because at this viewport with what we are seeing here is not up to 1 rem. Okay, so yeah, so bumping up to 1.2 just makes it a little bit more so that is setting up the text. Now the next thing you're going to set up will be the width and breakpoint. Typically I like changing these values. Now the reason I like changing these values is this. Now take a look at this. This is 992 tablet, and then this is 768, you know, landscape. Okay, so now the tablet is 992 pixel, but if you go to your website and then you go to inspect and then you go to your iPad, you see that your iPad is 1024 and then the portrait is 768. Okay, you go to your iPad Pro, you can see that it's 1024. Okay, so I usually like to change this. So typically I will set my page width to maybe 1200. I usually like it to be 1200, and then my tablet I'll set it to be 1024, and then for the landscape I like keeping it from 800, and then this can remain at 480. Okay, and then I'll save that. The next thing we're going to look at is the column. So I'm going to look at the section and the column. By default, columns have a 20 pixel padding all around. Now you might not want that in any of your installation because they sometimes make it difficult for you to, you know, control spacing. So you would typically want to make it, you know, keep it at 0, you know, for all of them. And then the next thing for the section, you actually would want to have your paddings for the section, but then you want it to be responsive also. Now if you take a look at this section, it has 75 pixel padding up and down, and you want to make sure that that is responsive. Now if you go to this, you find out that it's still 75, and you know, for a mobile viewport it is too large. Okay, now you could also use Vmax. So I could say let's just say let me keep this at maybe 5. Okay, how is that? Okay, so that's just about, you know, so if I make it like 5.5, that's about just about 75. Okay, and then if I go all the way down here, so you can see that it reduces. Okay, but while this is still 75, but this has reduced. So now you can use clamp also for that, but for the purpose of this tutorial, since we want to save enough time as possible, I'm going to use Vmax for both the up and the down. Okay, so make sure that you choose none before you write the Vmax. The same thing applies to clamp. Make sure you choose none. Okay, so we have the different breakpoints. We'll have, you know, a responsive padding, okay, for the section, and then for the side padding, okay, that's for the left and right. Sometimes you might want to just leave it the same way, but sometimes you might want to, you know, make it responsive to, depending on your need. Personally, I use clamp. Okay, now this is 20, and that is about maybe 1 point something rem. Okay, so I could use that, or you could just decide to use Vmax. So depending on what you want, most of the time you probably will want to leave it because it's still okay. The you know, the size here is still okay. But if you want to have the situations where you want to have containers with its own padding, and it's going to be too much to have additional padding from the, you know, from the section. That is one reason you want to have that. So I'm going to keep it at, let's say, 1 Vmax. Okay, let's see how it is. Okay, that 1 Vmax is a bit too small, so you adjust it depending. So all right, so you have 1.4. Let's go down, so you can see it's just much smaller than what you have on this side. So we could just copy that and then paste on this side. So you can see that you have a decent padding that gives you enough room to, you know, have a padding in a container if you have a container. The next setting we're going to look at is the animate on scroll. So if you want to set a standard, you know, animate on scroll type, maybe you want it to always be fade up. Personally, I don't touch this until I'm working on a particular site, depending on the need. So I leave that, you know, open, and then for the script I usually check this and then set this to 400. Okay, then the scroll offset I will leave that blank. All right, the next thing we're going to do is to set up our utility classes, and for that purpose I'm going to populate the editor with some contents, and that will enable us to create our utility classes. So let me take away this section. Okay, I'm just going to remove that section, and let's save what we have done so far. Okay, I'm going to add another section. Okay, and then I'm going to add a div. Okay, and inside that div I'm going to add one div. So I have a div, I have another div inside here, and then inside that second div I just want to add maybe a heading, a text, and a button. Okay, all right, I'm just gonna call this okay, so I'm just gonna write something, and then a block of text. I'm gonna just copy lorem ipsum. Okay, all right, okay, so and then for the button I'm gonna just say click here. All right, okay, so that is going to help us set up a utility class. And I'm going to duplicate this div. Okay, and then I'm going to do something different. For this one I'm going to give it change that to h2. Okay, I'm just going to write something like features. Okay, with you know, some text, and with some and a button. Let me just change that. Okay, so so now the first thing I'm going to do, the first thing I want to do is to set up a simple CSS grid utility class. Now this is going to be a very simple CSS grid utility class. Okay, I'm going to have 3 of them. Okay, so I'm going to duplicate this again. All right, so I'm going to have 3 of those utility classes. Okay, let's set up the first one. For this one I want to set up a simple 4-column grid layout. So I want to add a grid layout that shows 4 grids. Okay, I want it to show 4 grids, and then 2 grids on the medium screen, and 4 columns on the big screen, 2 columns on the medium screen, and 1 column on the small screen. So I'm going to call it column 4, 2, 1. So this is my naming convention. You could just come up with your naming convention. I'm saying for I'm starting from this side, okay? 1 column here, 2 column here, and then from this upwards 4 columns. Now, so I'm going to select that div, okay, and then I'm going to go to grid layout. I'll set this to 4, and then I'm going to set the maximum width to auto, okay. Okay, that's wrong. Okay, I selected this div instead of this, so let me quickly undo that, okay. All right, so I'm gonna just close this so I can see what I'm doing. Now the first one will be, I really undid that class, column 4 2 1, okay. I'm gonna add that class, and then I'm gonna select grid. I'm gonna set this to 4, okay, and then I'm gonna set the minimum width to auto. All right, so inside this div, let me give this main div a light background color, okay. So I'm gonna go to the background color and just select that light accent color. All right, and then for my div here, I'm gonna make it white so that we can see what is going on. All right, so now I've set up that grid, okay. So I'm going to duplicate this just to enable us to complete our setup. I'm going to duplicate this 4 times, okay. All right, so I have 4 of that grid, okay, and then I'm going to throw in another utility class, and then I'm going to call that padding all. All right, so I'm going to do it on the need basis, okay. That is why I put this as the need, as we have need to apply, you know, classes and, you know, paddings and margin. We're going to create different utility classes. I'm going to call this padding all, okay. So, and then I'm going to go into the section size and spacing. I'm going to apply a padding. Now I want that padding to be responsive, so I'm going to set this to none, and then I'm going to set that to 2 Vmax, and then I'm going to apply it to all. So I have that padding, you know, for the primary container, and then if I go to the small, I can see that padding is still there, okay, but it's much smaller than it was. So depending, okay, you could create different paddings. Now for the padding, it's usually, personally, I prefer it to be on clamp. So I'm going to go here, and then I'll start from the minimum of 1 to 3 rem, okay. So that's for my padding. All right, so I'm going to just paste that here and then click apply to all. So you can see that I have a big nice padding on the big screen, but when I come here, the padding reduces appropriately. Okay, so now I have a padding. That is my padding utility class. Now let me go back to my columns utility class. So remember, what we want to do is to have you know, these 4 sections up till these breakpoints, okay, and then from these breakpoints we want to have it 2 columns, not sections. I'm going to select this again at that breakpoint, and then I'm going to say 2, okay, and then minimum width still auto. All right, so you can see, and then at this breakpoint I want to adjust the gap. At a smaller screen I want the gap to be smaller. That the default gap is 20, so I'm going to give it 10, okay, and then I'm going to give it 10 here. All right, so my default gap here is 10. Now let me go back to all devices, okay. Here is okay, here is okay, all right, and then here it breaks into 2. Now let's go to the smallest breakpoint. You want that to be just 1, okay, and then of course the width to be auto, and then the gap still make it 10. All right, so we have a layout that is you know, adaptive, okay, to the screen sizes. So we have, this is a utility class. So now if I throw in, you know, say another section, another, div, and I apply that class to it. Okay, so I choose column. Automatically that class is applied to it. Unfortunately, we made a mistake. Like you can see, we had a problem, with that color showing up. So I'm going to delete that color from that class. Okay, I meant to apply that color to just that div only, so I'm going to apply it to just the ID. Okay, so you have to be careful when you are creating your utility classes. So now I have that utility class. So let's say I drop in maybe an image. Okay, so you can see that image takes up just one column out of the 4, and then if I duplicate this 3 times, you can see that it automatically adjusts, okay, to the breakpoint, okay, 4 and 1 with all the spacing, okay, that you want. So that is it for that particular utility class. Okay, now I'm going to set up another column class. Now the next one I want to set up will be, I want a 3-column layout on all screen size, but 1 column on the smallest screen size. So I'm going to delete this. Okay, I'm going to delete that image so that I can use this to apply that. I'm going to delete this class from that. Okay, so what I want to do is I'm just going to add a new class, col331. So what I'm saying is 3 columns on big screen, 3 columns on medium screen, and 1 column on the small screen. Okay, so I'm going to go grid 3 auto. All right, and then my paddings are still okay. Now for this one, I'm going to set, I want my div, my container, to be 100% viewport width by default. Okay, so yeah, so I probably should have done the same to the other one, but it probably doesn't really matter that much. Okay, but you want a situation by when you apply that class, even though you don't have enough item inside, I want a situation where it automatically just stretches out to show you, look, you have stuff to put here. Okay, so that is why I'm doing that, and I'm going to add that to this one also. I'm going to add that to this class also. All right, so let me add 100%. Okay, so that works everywhere properly. Okay, so now we're on this. So I want this to be 3 columns, so I'm just going to duplicate that again. Okay, I want this to be 3 columns, so up till this breakpoint is still going to be 3 columns, but at this breakpoint I want to reduce the gap. So I'm going to select grid here, and then I'm going to still choose 3, but the gap I'm going to change it to 10. Okay, and 10, and then I'm going to set the minimum width to auto. Okay, and then at the smallest breakpoint I'm going to set it to 1, just 1. Okay, and minimum width auto. All right, and then the gap, I like setting both of them, even though for the row height is what really, the row gap is what really matters here, but I like applying that to both of them. So you can see that we have our 3 grids here. Okay, and then when we get down here we still have the 3 grids but with smaller spacing, and here we have 1. So let me go back. All right, so we have our 3 grids here. Okay, so if I select this div and then apply that 3 grid layout to it, you see it's going to quickly apply it. All right, and then I apply that padding to it. You see what happens there, and for this I can now take it and duplicate it 3 times, and I have my grid responsive up to this point where we still have 3 of them. Okay, and then for here we have you know, one column each. All right, so now the third column is going to be 2 2 1. Okay, so we want it, so I'm going to apply that to this. I'm going to apply it to this this div. Okay, so I want it to be 2 on the large screen, 2 on the medium screen, and 1 on the small screen. So I'm going to add that class col221, okay, -1, okay, and then I'm going to make it 100% width like the others, okay, and I'm going to select grid to auto, okay, and let me quickly just duplicate that div inside it. So you can see it gives us a 2-column div. Now I'm just going to give this a background to the main div, the background on the ID, okay. All right, well, maybe I should just change that to bluish, okay. And then so let's continue editing our utility column grid class. Okay, so let me quickly add that padding. Oh dear, I mistakenly did something there. Padding, okay, so I'm adding that padding to just all right, so we have 2, okay, so if we go here to up till this, we're still going to have 2, okay. Then the last one we will have 1. Let's go to the last breakpoint. We'll have just 1, okay, so by default is 1 and the width to auto. Okay, so we have that class set up. So we see we've finished setting up the 3 utility classes, and for this one, let me give this this background white so that we can see our spacing, okay. We did not set up that spacing at the lower breakpoint, okay, so I'm going to select that column 2 2 1, yeah, and then go to the smaller breakpoint. From these breakpoints, I want the spacing to be 10 like we did the others, so I'm going to repeat 2 auto and gap 10, and also here gap 10. So you see, if we select this div and duplicate it, so we have a nice you know, gap spacing there. All right, so the next thing I'm going to do is to add a medium padding. So we're going to add so we had the padding all, which is kind of like the big padding for the section, and then I'm going to select maybe something like this, okay, and then I'm going to apply maybe a medium padding to it. So let me add padding M, okay. All right, so what I want there is a medium padding. So in our large, you know, in our big padding, what we used was 1 rem to 3. So for the medium padding, I'm going to use maybe 0.8, okay, to say maybe about 2. So something, you know, small enough that if you just want to apply to maybe to maybe a small card, you don't want the spacing to be that much, okay, you could just do it, just a medium additional utility class, okay. So I will just go here and choose none and just paste this. All right, so I have a padding that is slightly smaller than this, and will also, you know, scale properly at a small viewport, you know, width, okay. So you can see that this is just slightly smaller, so it's something that, you know, you might want to consider. So you can have an extra option if you want to, you know, add a smaller size. You can always do that. The next thing I want to add is the margins, okay. So I'm gonna add, now if you can see, we have a div here and we have another div here, we have another div here. So let me give this div a color so we can separate them. Okay, give it a color, let's make it different. All right. Okay, so now I want this div. Okay, I want to have maybe a margin bottom. Okay, so we're gonna add three margin utility classes. We're gonna have the margin bottom large, margin bottom medium. Okay, and we're gonna have the margin bottom small. Okay, so what we're gonna do is that we're gonna use clamp. Okay, still to do that. So we're gonna start with a minimum of 2.4 for the margin bottom large. So because you want to have those large spaces between your sections, or between the sections and all the divs. So I'm gonna just go margin BL. So that's my margin bottom large. Okay, and then I'm going to go to size and spacing. I want to use the value of 2.4 to 5. Okay, so 2.4 to 5. And how do I know that? Of course, I probably have done this before, so I know that that will work for my big padding. My big margin bottom. Okay, so for the margin bottom, all I need to do is just to go to the bottom. Okay, and then paste in that. So it gives me a good, nice margin bottom. Okay, so if I take that and apply to all this, you can see, so I have my nice margin bottom that scales also properly. See, it becomes a bit smaller here, and then it's bigger here. Okay, so I have my margin bottom, okay, set up, and then I wanna set up a margin bottom medium. Okay, so I'm gonna click here, and then I want to set up my margin bottom medium. For my margin bottom medium, I'm just going to set a single unit. Okay, I'm not going to use clamp, so it's just going to be a single unit that be the same on all screen sizes. So because I have found out that margin bottom M, I have found out that this margin bottom, if it is too small, okay, as long as it is small, if you try using clamp, you're going to end up with very small margin, which may not look okay. But you feel free to play around with that. But from my own experience, I prefer setting my margin bottom medium with a single rem unit. Okay, so I'm just going to give it 1.5, 1.5. Okay, and that is my medium margin bottom. Okay, and then now for the margin bottom small. Okay, sometimes you have a very small, like let's say you have a very small, too small element, and you want the space between them to be just a little bit, just a little. Okay, so you want to have maybe the third one. Okay, margin bottom small. Okay, and then for that one I use 0.5 rem. Okay, so you see, something that tiny. Okay, so I just have it handy just in case I need to use something like that. And notice this one, I'm not using clamp, or I just use rem units that and if you look at all device size, they're going to be the same. Okay, I want it to be the same. Now for this, on a second thought, looking at this kind of look a bit more than I would want it to be on a small screen size. So if you are not comfortable with that, okay, you could just go ahead and use the clamp. Okay, use the clamp. What I did was 1.5. Okay, so you could say, okay, maybe a minimum of 1. Okay, so you could just go say 1 to 1.5, or maybe 0.8. Okay, let's keep it at 0.8, and then just copy that. For the medium, I said I wasn't going to use clamp, but on a second thought, I think I should use clamp for that medium. Okay, so I'll make sure I'm on the medium, and then I'll just go choose none, okay, and then paste that in. All right, so that should, apply. I think I didn't copy something. Okay, so yeah, there's a mistake there. That 5 is not supposed to be there. I didn't delete it. Okay. All right, so we have that. So when you go down the viewports, you can see it adjusts appropriately. All right, so the next one we're going to create will be, now let me go and apply those paddings here. Okay, so I want to apply my padding all to here. Okay, I don't like it. Okay, and let me remove it. It's too much for the 4, so I'm just going to apply the medium. All right, so I like the medium. Okay, so I could just add that medium to all this. Okay, so you see the usefulness of having more than one. Okay, padding medium. Let's set it to here also, so I can just hit M, and I can just hit M and bring it up. Okay, so I can just do that. All right, okay, so we have a text here, and then of course let me add this margin bottom medium, or not large, that's gonna be too much. Margin bottom medium. Okay, so I'll do the same here, margin bottom medium. Okay, all right, so okay, so I have that class applied here, and of course there are better ways to do stuff with cards. Okay, but for now that is what we are doing. Okay, why don't I just delete these ones and then just duplicate that. I think it's faster that way since we don't have content. All right, so next thing I want to do is to add the border radius utility class. So I'm going to add border radius. Now we're going to have 3 border radius: large, medium, and extra. 4. We're going to have small, medium, large, and extra large. Border radius. Okay, ace. So for the border radius one, I'm going to add class. We're going to go to advanced borders, and then we're going to give it 5. Okay, so you can see it's very small. Okay, let me increase the let me increase this. Okay, so you can see, so you have a very small border radius. Okay, I'm going to select the next one. Okay, and then I'm going to go create a border radius medium. Border radius M, add class, and then for my border radius medium, I want to make it 10. All right, so you can see it's just slightly bigger than this one. Now the reason I'm having in-betweens like this is sometimes you want to add it to a button, you want it to be just slightly more than what the default button has. Okay, and then you want to have another one that you can add to cards, and then you can add to buttons to make it rounded. So you want to have border radius large. Okay, so for the border radius large, for instance, let me just let's add that. XL, add class. For that one, we go for 20, okay, 20 pixels. And okay, so that's okay. And then for the extra large, there are times you need it to be extra large, okay? So it's good to have enough of them to play with. So border radius XL, okay? And then I'm gonna do the same thing. For that, I give it 30. All right, so we have a 3 border radius, okay? So we could apply any one to, you know, depending on what you feel like doing. All right, so those are the 3 border radius. Now the next utility class we want to create is one very important one, okay? So let me do something. Let me remove, let me delete these columns, okay, and leave only one, okay? Unnecessary. I really don't need to do that. I can do, okay, let me leave 3, okay? And then let's remove that class, the column 4, okay, from there, and apply the column 3, okay? All right, so now you can see that this button, all these are, you know, aligned to the left. I usually, you know, like having a utility class that will allow an element to independently align to the center, and that is the auto margin, okay? I'm going to create that class, auto margin, okay? And now what this utility class is going to be responsible for is just to center an item. So I'm going to give it margin left and right auto. So that's just it. So whenever I have an element that I need to center on a page, you know, I can just apply the, you know, auto, okay, to it, and that's it, okay? So I like having that class. Then another class I like having is a utility class of transition. Now I want maybe transition for all my, you know, all my elements to be in a set, like to have the same setting. So I can go to effect, transition, and just set my transition duration to, you know, 0.4, okay, 0.4 seconds, and that's all. And I can apply that to any property. Okay, so we're done with the paddings and the columns, now I have one very useful utility class I usually create, okay, for my website. So what I'm going to do, let me just duplicate this column. Or the website, the Oxygen editor is just a bit slow. I'm not sure if it is because of the screen recording, you know. Let me duplicate this. So I'm going to delete this column, this. Okay, so I'm going to remove that class, that 3 columns grid class, and then, okay, so I have this, okay. Let me just populate that with more text. Okay, so now sometimes you have a text, okay, and then maybe you really don't want your text to be to go all the way from end to end here, okay. You want it to be somewhere in the center. Now there are a couple of different things you could do with that. Sometimes you could set a width, you could set a maximum width and all. Say, okay, it shouldn't be bigger than a particular, you know, width. So, but what I would like to do there is, I like creating a utility class for it. I'll call it, you know, center paragraph text, okay. Now, for that class, what I would do is I go into the typography and click center, okay, and then I'll go into the size and spacing, and I'll give it a maximum width of 70 characters, 70 ch. Sorry, I have to choose none. All right, so I've set that maximum. Now, of course, that's not what is affecting. This was not set to this div wasn't set to 100%, okay. So let me just set that div to 100%. Are you sure I'm not setting that? All right, so so you can see that this automatically reduces, okay? And for a class like that, you know, I would like to add auto margin also to it. Okay, so you wanna because sometimes you want that to be at the center, okay? And I want to automatically make everything, you know, center for that utility class, okay? So I don't need to add the auto for it, but for flexibility, sometimes you don't want it to stay at the center. It all depends depending on how you want to do it. If you want to leave it and manually add the auto margin utility class, you can do that. But since this class is specifically for text, I think everything should come, you know, inside that utility class, the center settings for the page. So you can see that it, you know, everything works well. So I set that to maximum of 70 characters, okay? And then so it can't go beyond 70 characters. It says CSS unit. You can check that out. So that is another important utility class. Then one other one I usually like doing is to set, you know, a style for my primary button, okay? So I'm going to set for my primary button. Now what I usually do for that one is that I usually set the color of my primary button to the primary color, okay? And then the hover to, if I had maybe a hover color, okay, I set that, and then I go ahead to set the transition for it. So I want to have a transition on my on the class, on that class for the button, okay? Then another thing I like doing for the primary button is to go to size and spacing and then add a left and right padding of 3M, okay? So I usually like my buttons to have that. So even at a small you know, viewport, I still prefer them to, you know, to look similar. You know, nothing wrong with them. So, but if you like to make adjustment to yours, you could use the clamp unit, or you could just add, you know, something. You know, you could just come to the smallest, you know, the smallest viewport and just reduce it to like 2M. Okay, so you have your, you know, your button there, or you could use a clamp, okay, for it. All right. So that is one class I like adding. So if I come here now, okay, and then I decide to add the button class, okay. All right, so automatically, so you see that you have your primary and, you know, secondary colors. So any website, once you change that, you know, on the setting in any of the website you are exporting this boilerplate to, is going to automatically update on that button class. Now that we are done, you know, creating our utility classes, okay, we have set up Oxygen global settings, we've set up our template, the footer and all that. You probably would want to take a look at your selectors. If you want to categorize them, maybe you want to have all these classes in different folders, because when you're working on your website, sometimes you will create additional classes depending on, these are utility classes. You're going to create additional classes depending on what you're working on. So you want to have this separate. So you could, you know, add a folder and just call it utility classes, okay? And then you can now select, okay, that's a bad folder name, utility dash classes, okay? All right. Okay, so I needed to put a dash, no spaces allowed. Now you can select, unfortunately there's no way to select all of them at the same time. If I, you know, control, no, it doesn't select. So you can select, you know, these classes, okay? Like this footer. I wouldn't classify this footer as a utility class, so I'm gonna leave it. So you select the folder, okay? So you can see that it automatically moves that to that folder. So you can just select this. So unfortunately, you probably would have to do that one after the other. Okay, so I'm gonna just choose that. So you could do that to, you know, add those classes to the folder. I really wish there was a way to just create these classes inside the folder or select all of them. Okay, so you want to do this so that while you're working on your website, you will be able to differentiate between your utility classes and your regular classes, especially when you're coming to the selectors, okay, to check on something. All right, so we have all that, categorized here, so you don't mix them up with, the ones that usually appear by default here. I'm going to save that, and we are done with our, website, okay, set up. So for more advanced, setup for cards and styles, I will recommend you watching a video by Digital Ambition, how to properly set up Oxygen. So you have these what he called owl spacing, okay, where you set up a style that can apply to a card, and that will cascade down into the content, adjacent sibling selectors to add spacing to the siblings, so to the child elements of the card. So you want to check that out at Digital Ambition's channel, and you will learn a lot from it. Okay, so now that we have finished setting up our utility class, so what next? How do you move all these from here to to another installation? Okay, so first of all, you might want to just delete all this. Since we have finished setting them up, we don't need all this design. We're using them to set up our classes. Okay, so I'm gonna delete this and then save, and then I'm gonna go to the back end, and let's see how we can move this from from this installation. Okay, so we can always use it anytime we have a website. All right, okay, so what I use is all-in-one WP migration. That's what I use. That's what I always use to migrate my website. It works very well. And one thing I'd like you to take note is that if you install all-in-one migration, you want to install what is called all-in-one migration file extension. Unfortunately, that is not available in the WordPress repository, so you will have to go to their website. I think I have something like that. Okay, so this is import.wpmigration.com. so if you go here, you're going to find that this is that extension. So this extension enables you to import or export, or to import file size that are up to 512 MB. Okay, so if you go to import, you're going to find out that in some of your setup, you see that your maximum upload file size is less than 512 MB. So this enables you to be able to upload any file size that is up to or less, 512 MB or less. But if you want something that is more, unlimited file size, you can get the premium. It says $69 lifetime, so I think it's cool. All right, so what I do is I go to export. Okay, once I finish with my installation, of course you might want to regenerate CSS first of all. Okay, and then you go there, and then you're going to export to file or FTP, depending on which one you want, or Dropbox. They have a couple of options here, but I typically export to file. And since it's just a template, it's just a boilerplate, the size is usually small enough, 52 MB. And then once that is done, I just download it. Okay, so I'm not going to download this one. I just download it, and then when I have a fresh installation, the first thing I do is just go, what I do in my fresh installation is I just install these two plugins. Okay, this and this, the all-in-one WP migration and the all-in-one migration file extension. So I install the two of them, and then I use that to import my installation. So I import from file, and then I'll choose that installation and then install it, and then I have my WordPress boilerplate set and ready. So everything is set for me to start. All my utility classes will be available right on the go. So I hope you learned something from this this video, and if there's any addition that you would have loved to see, if you have any suggestion, if you have other classes you would have loved to create, please let us know in the comments. If you have any question, let us know, and don't forget to like and subscribe if you haven't, and also share this video with with others. Until I see you again, have a great day.